In this video, I will show how Taiwan planned early on to promote domestic vaccines in Taiwan over getting proven vaccines from the West. Tsai deliberately didn't order vaccines that had gone through phase 3 testing in the US, like Pfizer or BNT, Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson, because the quantities were too high for the Taiwan market and she needed to protect the domestic vaccines. Tsai seemingly put out fake news that she was ordering a lot of vaccines, but the vaccines didn't come in when they claimed they would. Taiwan also rushed the domestic vaccine Medigen to the Taiwan market without doing phase 3 testing, allegedly in order to help the company's stock price. Taiwan also cooperated with other nations to focus on getting donations of AstraZeneca because the quantities were at levels that wouldn't block the domestic vaccines. Japan played a key role in assisting Tsai in getting AstraZeneca at quantities acceptable to Tsai's greater plan. Tsai also ignored public safety issues by pushing AstraZeneca on the Taiwan public when other nations banned it or chose simply not to use it. Due to all of these actions, I would highly question Taiwan's loyalty to Taiwan as a head of state. She places Taiwan's public safety at the lowest priority and puts the corporate interests of domestic pharmaceutical companies at the highest priority. So let's take a look at the available vaccines. The mRNA vaccines are Pfizer/BNT and Moderna. The main viral vector vaccines are AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. We won't be looking at the vaccines classified as inactivated virus and protein/VLP. Now, I would argue that these are the only vaccines that should be considered for use in Taiwan because they are currently in phase 3 or past phase 3. However, Taiwan is currently using Medigen, which has not even done phase 3 testing.
It's great to have you. This is a big day, the first phase 3 trial in the United States of a COVID-19 vaccine kicking off. So tell us about the timelines we should expect here. This is a 30,000 participant trial. How quickly do you think you can enroll that many participants, and when will we see the data?
So to summarize this news story, we see the stock price of Moderna going up as it begins phase 3 testing. We also see the timeline of all 3 phases of Moderna, and we also see the production goals of Moderna versus the other vaccines.
Pfizer and its German partner BioNTech now announcing they have begun their pivotal phase 2-3 trial of their COVID-19 vaccine. That's beginning in the United States. They plan to enroll, just like Moderna, up to 30,000 participants. They're going to have more than 100 trial sites around the globe, but the first ones here in the United States. Now they are going to be enrolling around the world as well, including in Argentina, Brazil, and in Germany. So this will enroll up to 30,000 people ages 18 to 85 on that 1-to-1 ratio of vaccine versus placebo. So similar there in terms of the Moderna vaccine candidate.
Meg, I'm just curious in terms of how the phases are conducted. Phase 3, as I understand it in vaccine trials, is usually when you determine how long the vaccine lasts in terms of protection. These are very compressed studies, and so will we actually have a good handle on how long protection lasts, or is it just going to be we're going to determine this once it's distributed and in the field?
But vaccines is not one of those things you want to rush to get to market, if you know what I mean. There's a reason why these things take 18 months to 2 years, and that's because of the trials that people have to go through. And that's because of how fastidious these companies have to be in order to get them to market. So
it's phase 3 clinical trials, the last stage before approval. AstraZeneca says it's enrolling 30,000 Americans in the late stage clinical trial and another 20,000 outside the country. Participants will receive 2 active or 2 placebo doses spaced 4 weeks apart. The approval process normally takes months, if not years, but the FDA commissioner has said if there's enough data from phase 3 trials early, authorization could be possible.
So phase 3 trials means that it's a larger sample size of participants, with one half receiving a placebo and the other half actually receiving the vaccine. Besides safety, the effectiveness of the vaccine can be evaluated in phase 3. However, phase 3 was skipped in Taiwan for both of the domestic vaccines. The Tsai administration later claimed that the US vaccines had skipped phase 3 in order to defend itself. However, we can see from these reports that Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca all went through their phase 3 clinical trials.
This year, countries around the world committed tremendous resources and capabilities to combating the pandemic and preventing an economic downturn. On the other hand, taking advantage of our preoccupation. Certain regimes use technology to monitor the movements of their people, control pandemic prevention materials, and limit the freedom of information and expression. We have seen how expansionism encroaches on the rules-based international order, encourages border conflicts, and disregards freedom and human rights. The situation in Hong Kong serves as an unfortunate example. This also means Taiwan now stands at the forefront of safeguarding democracy. To accomplish this important task, Taiwan needs support and collaboration from democracies around the world, such as the Czech Republic.
In this video, Tsai is fancying herself as a national leader of a democratic nation with similar values to the Czech Republic. She takes the opportunity to put down Hong Kong's prevention measures as if they infringe on human rights and freedom of expression. Tsai really shouldn't be the one to talk about these things, as she limits freedom of expression and freedom of speech on the internet from those who expose her and her administration for being an illegal and authoritarian regime. We can see here that her track record of preventing cases of COVID in Taiwan is of vital importance to her diplomacy and image as a great democratic leader in contrast to Hong Kong and mainland China. However, she isn't a harbinger of freedom of speech and democracy, and she wasn't actually doing a good job of preventing the spread of COVID in Taiwan. Her administration was apparently doing all it could to hide and conceal domestic transmissions for over half a year.
Taiwanese pharma Medigen Vaccine Biologics has entered an agreement with Vietnam to develop a COVID vaccine. Between 500 and 1,000 subjects are expected to be recruited in Vietnam to complete phase 2 clinical trials.
Last Saturday, we signed an agreement to carry out joint clinical trials. We hope to have a vaccine to supply to Taiwan in 2021.
3 firms in Taiwan, Adimune, United Biomedical, and Medigen, are wrapping up phase 1 clinical trials. In phase 2 trials, each company will need to test the vaccine on 3,000 subjects. Medigen Vaccine Biologics is aiming to test its vaccine on 2,000 to 2,500 Taiwanese subjects and 500 to 1,000 individuals from Vietnam. Medigen Vaccine Biologics says it expects to obtain authorization to start phase 2 trials in December, with testing occurring over 4 or 5 months in 2021. Phase 3 trials could be completed as early as May next year.
As we'll see later, Medigen vaccine ends up getting approved in Taiwan without even starting phase 3 trials.
As COVID-19 cases climb around the world once again, we take a closer look at the government that has most successfully tackled the pandemic in Asia, Taiwan. Just 7 people have died of the coronavirus there, with a total of 570 cases ever recorded as of this Tuesday. Some people have pointed out its island geography as one explanation, but take one look at the UK and that should dispel any myth about an island advantage. In fact, Taiwan was especially vulnerable in the early days of the pandemic, with hundreds of flights going to China every week, making its success in the fight against COVID all the more remarkable.
People have gone through more than 200 days without a local transmission record. Jason Wang, a public health expert from Stanford University, has been studying the Taiwan model since the early stage of the pandemic. He traveled twice from the US to Taiwan this year.
One of the things that I noticed immediately is how serious that they take the quarantine procedures. And so they track you by sort of your cellular signals on your phone. The location where we were undergoing quarantine, there were barely any signals. And so, so we got visited by the police and the public health department.
So we can see here that the Western media had an agenda in promoting the Tsai administration for its COVID prevention measures. While it is true that Taiwan has strict quarantine measures, citizens and people with resident permits simply have to provide a certificate of a negative COVID test from the territory that they were originally in. However, due to the fact that there was no testing at the borders, several cases of COVID were brought into Taiwan on an almost daily basis. So on November 18, 2020, Pfizer and BioNTech concluded their Phase 3 study and released their results, meeting all primary efficacy endpoints. So in this Business Today report, dated November 18, 2020, former Premier Lin Chuan from Taiwan's first administration told the truth about why his pharmaceutical company was unable to secure BNT vaccines for Taiwan. Later in 2021, the Taiwan administration claimed that China had prevented it from ordering BNT or Pfizer, but former Premier Lin Chuan of Taiwan pharmaceutical company TTY Biopharm confirmed that there was a serious negotiation between them and BNT. So why didn't the deal go through? It was definitely not because of China. Lin Chuan said in the press conference that his pharmaceutical company needed to pay an amount of money for the authorization letter to gain the right to order BNT. The payment would have to be in advance. His company used a conditional authorization letter to negotiate with the Tsai government. According to the conditional authorization letter, Taiwan could purchase up to 30 million doses. The Ministry of Health and Welfare said that it planned to purchase only 2 million vaccines. The suspension of talks between Lin Chuan's company and BNT was due to a lack of consensus on the quantity and price of the vaccines. 2 million was far below the available supply of BNT. There is also an issue of Taiwan's cold storage capacity, as the limit was set to 2 million. Since the quantity was too low, the price per dose was higher than expected. So Lin Chuan's company suspended the conditional authorization contract with BNT. So you can interpret from this article that Taiwan lacks the cold storage facilities for more than 2 million doses of BNT, or that Tsai was unwilling to order more than 2 million for another reason, or just wasn't willing to increase Taiwan's cold storage capacity. The Ministry of Health and Welfare didn't give an official reason, and just said that they would buy only 2 million from Lin Chuan's pharmaceutical company if it bought vaccines from BNT. As we can see, there was no issue with territorial rights with Fosun Pharmaceutical in Shanghai. Otherwise, how could Lin Chuan's company receive a conditional authorization letter to purchase vaccines from BNT in the first place? It was a direct negotiation that fell through due to Taiwan's inability or unwillingness to purchase more than 2 million doses of BNT. The whole issue of China interfering in the process was only brought up after there was a breakout in Taiwan in May 2021. Tsai changed the story to an issue of territorial rights and political interference from China, when in fact she just wasn't willing to order BNT at the quantities necessary to make the sale possible, with the pharmaceutical company as the middleman. So on December 8, 2020, Phase 3 trials of AstraZeneca were completed, and the vaccine showed it had up to 90% efficacy in the UK.
Good news on the COVID-19 front. Taiwan has secured nearly 20 million doses of COVID vaccines, 5 million more than previously reported.
The health minister made the announcement on Wednesday, saying the vaccines will start to roll out next March.
The Central Epidemic Command Center is assured of having nearly 20 million doses. These include 4.76 million doses from COVAX and 10 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. We're completing the final confirmation with another company. That's another 5 million doses. The first deliveries will arrive March 2021.
But of course, as we find out later, that only a small amount of AstraZeneca arrives in Taiwan by March 2021, far less than the 20 million promised. Also, amongst the 20 million vaccines, he counted the domestic ones which hadn't even begun Phase 2 testing. There was no way that they could be ready by March 2021. As of July 2021, they haven't even done Phase 3 testing.
As for Taiwan's own vaccine development, Medigen is the furthest along with conditional approval to start Phase 2 trials. Two other firms, Adamune and United Biomedical, are also developing COVID vaccines. The CECC says it hopes domestically developed vaccines will be ready for use sometime next year.
So on December 31st, Moderna announced the publication of its results for Phase 3 trials. While there was an explanation given why the Tsai administration didn't order BNT or Pfizer, there was no explanation given why it didn't make an attempt to order a large amount of Moderna when it could have. The issue of the territoriality of the BNT vaccine was the only reason given why the Tsai administration didn't order vaccines in large quantities in late 2020. Moderna was available, and Johnson & Johnson became available 2 months later, yet there was no attempt to order either of these vaccines that were being used in the US.